as a chief, you start dealing with and you see more, things that are going on with your sailors. And, there's other people, you see that they don't have, you can't see the mentality. You can't see a mental illness in somebody. Somebody breaks their arm, you see them in a cast. Somebody twists their ankle, you're on crutches. You can visibly see that they're light and limited duty. And so, in your mind, you don't expect much from them. You can't do that with mental health. Because I had been receiving mental health for so long, I had a greater appreciation for that. But somebody that didn't understand it, if you can't see it, the first thing that you assume is that they're faking it because they don't want to do their work.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Steven. Steven he enlisted in 1996 as an AMS. He was stationed at Oceana, Virginia, Jacksonville, Florida, Brunswick, Maine, and Whidbey Island, and started taking medication for depression in 2005. He advanced to AMCS and then W2, medically retired after being diagnosed with conversion disorder during his first tour as a W2. Steven, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to just pass it off to you so the listeners can hear the story from you.
All right. So I actually just started remembering the other day, like during my first tour, it was like I came in and we had the don't ask, don't tell, right? And and suicide awareness was pretty much the same way as like I never got an actual confirmation from professionals or anything, but that was the rumor mill, what everybody says, that if you ever admitted that you had suicidal tendencies, that they were gonna process you out of the Navy. So it's like you couldn't tell anybody if you were thinking about that. And mental health was pretty taboo, like when I first came in on my first tour. So I guess and that kind of that impression kind of pushed everything back, and then being an airframer, it was like you got to have thick skin, right? So you build up a tolerance, I guess, and you just, if something gets to you, you don't show it. You pack it away and suck it up, right? So that's what I did. Developed the thick skin, and pretty much said nothing's ever gonna hurt me, and if anything ever hurt me, it never would. And got through my first tour there in Oceana, Virginia, and then my next tour was down in Jacksonville, in Florida, and it was P3, so a little bit less stressful than Tomcats. And so everything was kind of good there. And when I left my second tour in Jacksonville, I just made first class, went back to Oceana to Tomcats, and I did the last cruise on the JFK. And when we came back, we were transitioning from Tomcats to Super Hornets. During that cruise, I was the line LPO, and I had like 50 airmen working for me. It's my first like leadership job because I just made first whenever I left Jacksonville. And so being in the line, a lot of undesignated sailors, and I had one of my sailors, he'd come up to me and he's like, AM1, you're like, I'm gonna strike airframer, man, because when I go through my Navy career, that's what I want to do. I want to be like you. And I really took that to heart. I was like, okay, I tried to distill in my sailors, not just that they're doing the job or why they're doing the job, explaining what the missions were, what our airplanes were doing, why we were going where we were going, and things like that, because You don't have to have a high rank to get a big picture. So when we got back, when we got back from cruise, I wasn't the line LPO anymore. And we were going through the transition from Tomcats to Super Hornets. So we were basically a squadron with no airplanes, and everybody's all scattered out. And one day, my chief came in and asked if I had heard anything or seen anything from that sailor that I was talking about earlier. And I told her no, I didn't know anything. So all we knew is that he was UA for a couple days until we got the word that he had been found, and he had committed suicide. And that was when, the first time in my naval career that I actually, I broke down. I couldn't take it. And I honestly, I didn't see it. It was my MMCO, a warrant officer. He came up to me and he's like, "Silly, what's going on?" They're like, you don't look like yourself." I was like, "I don't know. I'm just, I'm struggling with this. The sailor that died, and my grandma had just passed away around the same time too." And he actually suggested that I go and see the mental health. And so that I went over to Portsmouth and actually started. That's when I first started taking medicine. And but I still had that, that same stigma as far as, okay, I can tell them I'm depressed, but that's as far as I'm gonna go. That's because if I say anything else, then my career is gonna be over. I'm gonna be gone. So I never said anything. I actually, started taking all kinds of medicine, and then it kind of helped my career then because I was able to speak up, and I was kind of a ballsy first class, to where if a chief was wrong, I wasn't afraid to tell him. And so I wasn't a big fan of the chief's mess, I guess. But at the same time, my maintenance master chief wasn't either. So he kind of we were talking in maintenance control one day, and he said something about me changing. It's like, well, oh damn, master chief, I have to take several different kinds of pills just so I can talk to you now. And he since then, I mean, after that, he kind of looked at me in a different light, and it almost took me under his wing, and it really helped my career. So I was able to get the evals there to advance to chief after I had went up to Brunswick. But as far as the mental health treatment there, I never talked about therapy or anything. It's always been medication, and that's still pretty much what I've dealt with. Even today, it's like I'm not real good in therapy, but it was just you get the mindset. As long as I got some pills, that's gonna make me to where I can get through the day, then it's gonna be all right. So there's nothing really significantly stands out during that tour. And my next tour up in Brunswick, they didn't have military mental health up there. So that was my first stint with a civilian provider. And it was pretty much the same though. Even there, it's just like, any psychiatrist, they're gonna talk to you about the medicine that they're giving you, what it's doing, how it's doing, if it's working, if it's not working. Do you need to change something else? Are you having bad side effects? It's all about medication management to get to a mood to where you can get through the day. That's pretty much every psychiatrist that I've dealt with is the same, military or civilian. So and it was during that tour when I lost my second sailor, and this was actually I was the chief in 500 division, and the sailor asked if he could go home to get something, and then later on that afternoon, my SEA came down and told me that he had stepped in front of a truck. So it was kind of hard. And actually that's one of the last times that I can remember crying. And it wasn't as much for the loss of the sailor as it was seeing how it was affecting my sailors. So it was, I mean, I guess it was really a combination of both. So at the time, nobody ever said it was a suicide. Nobody ever said it was an accident. There was nothing ever, one way or the other. We never got any confirmation about what actually happened. But that's the only thing, that we could come to the conclusion was, there was something going on that he wasn't telling us about. And uh, it just, and it was nothing. He had no signs at work, nothing showing that anything was going on at home. Nothing. He was a single sailor, lived about an hour away from the base, and never showed any kind of distress at work or anything going on in his home life. So that one was a little harder because my LPO and I had to go deliver the uniform to the funeral home and identify the body. So it was and then after that, plan the memorial service for the command and everything. And it was surreal. I mean, it was like, 2 tours in a row, and I lost sailors, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand, what was doing this, what was, or how I could prevent this. And, and I had got to the point to where my medication just pretty much made me numb to where everything. So it was, I could start feeling, empathy kind of just going away. Finished that tour. It was a short tour because the base was closing, and came over here to Whidbey Island. And while during that Jacksonville tour, I met my wife now, and we got married before we went to Oceana, and then we both, she was in the Navy too, and we transferred to Brunswick together, and then over to the West Coast here to Whidbey Island. And that was my first. I made chief while I was in Brunswick, and then came over to Whidbey Island as a chief, and started. That's where, I mean, things kind of got hard, because the way that I saw myself, the way that I carried myself, people, it seemed like they thought that I was just kissing up. During my induction process, I felt like that's when I joined the Navy. I felt like I was an aircraft mechanic before I made chief. And once I made chief and started seeing, the heritage and everything, that I started really paying attention to my sailors and making sure that the things that I did were that I didn't expect them to do anything that I wouldn't do. While I was in Brunswick, I was trying to do the right thing. One of my sailors, he was planning on getting out, and he I told him that he should follow 1306 to extend his EOS to his PRD, because he wasn't going to be rotating. He wasn't, and he was just going to be getting out. And when he submitted the 1306, then it brought the detailers' attention to him. And instead of extending his PRD to match his EOS, he was going to try to rotate him early to send him down to Guantanamo Bay. And I was like, oh, I felt, like an ass. I was like, I'm trying to help this guy out to match everything up. And now the detailer wants to roll him over to send him to watch detainees. And he found a way out of it, because you have to be within PFA standards to go IA. So that was the first time I ever seen somebody bloat their stomach out instead of suck in. So, but I mean, but at the same time, the reason I brought that up is because when I got to my squadron here, there was a volunteer for an IA. It was in a Prowler command, and the way that they were doing manning at the time within the whole VAQ wing, just because you got orders to a squadron didn't mean that you were going to stay at that squadron. It's like you might come to Whidbey Island, but you didn't know what squadron you were going to be there. So the squadron that I ended up in, I went while I was in CNAT learning, getting my Prowler NEC. I was walking down the flight line, going into maintenance controls, asking, who needs a chief or where can I get a job? Because the billet that I was billeted to in this one squadron, somebody made chief and they filled that billet. So, but I ended up, in a good squadron. But at the same time, everybody that was there had experience in Prowlers. I hadn't, I'd seen them on the flight deck when I was with Tomcats, but I don't have, the knowledge base of them. And so when they asked for volunteers to go to IA, I was like, to me, it made sense. One, because like I said before, I'm not going to ask a sailor to do an IA if I'm not willing to do it. And two, it's not me going away from the squadron. It's not going to hurt the squadron because I'm not a resident expert. But I think a lot of people saw that as, I was just trying to get a star. I was just trying to make senior chief by going IA, which wasn't my motivation at all. It was because it made sense for me to go instead of anybody else. And I didn't do it for accolades. I wasn't trying to get anything out of it. It just, like I said, it just made sense. And so I went down so I was only in the squadron, for a couple months, and went down to Gitmo for a year. And they went on cruise. And it's funny because I wanted to get back to the flight deck. When I was in Brunswick, I wanted to get back to the flight deck. I wanted to get back, on the roof. And my goal was to be lining up PO or FDC. I wanted the radio again. And I gave that up to go IA, and they went on cruise. And I've always wanted, I want to be on the tip of the spear when something's going on. I want to be there. And they ended up off the coast of Japan whenever the earthquake hit and had all that radiation stuff going on. I was like, so then everything happens with them. I was like, all my squadrons out there, dealing with this radiation, and I was like, man, I can't win for losing. I'm trying to be out there, trying to go to the battle, and the battle won't come to me. But I mean, that was just my mindset of what I did. But like I said, it felt like, the choices that I made were not necessarily what's the best interest of me, but what I felt were the best interests of the Navy or my command. And because I felt like that, and because I talked like that, then it looked like I was just kissing ass. And I told a sailor while I was IA, he asked me, he's like, "Oh, what did you do to make chief?" And I told him, honestly, I stopped trying, because my first couple of times of making chief, I was like, oh, I gotta have this for my package, and gotta do this and this, and trying to get checks in the block is like, it didn't come. I was like, fuck it, man. I'm just gonna do my job, take care of my sailors, do my job. And then that's when it happened. So I was like, I carried that attitude, as a chief, as a senior chief, and that attitude is what made me want to put my application in for W2, because I was looking probably at least 10 more years in the Navy if I stayed for 30. I was like, I could do 10 years as, a possible maintenance master chief, or 10 years and be a AMO, MMCO, assigned to, there was different kinds of jobs I could do during different tours, and not just the same job for 10 years. It's like, I couldn't imagine doing that. But so that was that carried on with, I've always tried to to fight the stigma of the pay grade. I wanted to change the reputation of a Navy chief. You know, I wanted to change the reputation of a ground officer. You know, I wanted to, during my commissioning ceremony, I made it a point that I said the sailor's creed, because I said that every sailor is a sailor from E1 to O10. That's what it was about. It's not. So I tried to, my motivation for being a warrant officer was carrying the chief in the warrant officer and keeping the chief in the warrant officer, but unfortunately was not able to complete that goal. So I finished up my senior chief tour, got my commission, went to my first command. And you remember I talked about thick skin and sucking it up? Well, it turns out if you keep sucking it up and you don't let it out, it doesn't go away. And what I had done without realizing it was taught myself how not to recognize stress. I had, you go through the training, you see the different colors and all that. It's safety stand downs, yada, yada, yada. Okay, now let me go home because this is bullshit, right? So not being able to recognize stress made me great in maintenance control, because shit would happen and I would just like be calm, like, okay, do this, and everything's fine. What I didn't know is my body was still reacting to it. And that's where my conversion disorder got my conversion disorder got me. I was at work one day. It was Valentine's Day. My wife, I went over to my wife's command that morning and gave her flowers. It's unusual. I don't always do that, but she's always talking about wanting to get flowers at work, So I did that, and I went over to my office, and I was sitting there, on the computer, and I started feeling strange. And I reached for my cell phone. I was going to call my wife because I was feeling strange. And then with my right hand on the mouse and my left hand on my cell phone, I just froze. I couldn't move. Totally locked up. My LPO was like, it's like, sir, you okay? I was like, I can't move. And we were talking about me physically moving houses earlier that morning. So that's what he thought I was talking. He's like, is that what you mean, sir? I was like, no, I can't move. And then after that, I couldn't talk. All I could do was just sit there. I was frozen, and nobody knew what was going on. They called the paramedics. The paramedics got me out, took me down to Coopville, did CT scans, MRIs. They didn't see anything wrong with me, couldn't find anything. During the MRI machine test, I actually started moving again. It was about 3 hours later. And then so everything was fine. It looked like, all the tests were normal, everything was fine. And they were about to, discharge me without really having a clue what was going on, because they couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. And then I started seizing up again. So that's when they transferred me down to a Swedish hospital in Seattle. And then they did the EEGs and everything and found out, yeah, my brain's fine too. So everything was physically fine with me. As far as medical is concerned, nobody could find anything wrong with me. I was just freezing up and stuttering for no reason. And that was when they came to the conclusion with my psychiatrist that I had a conversion disorder. I think it's called like functional neurological disorder or something now. But basically, when you have physical symptoms and it's manifested from your mind and not anything actually wrong with you. So that's when I first started trying therapy again, because they said that was the only way. And that's where, like I said, I messaged you before about Jennifer. That's where she was like pretty much my first therapist. and I talked to her, a couple times, a little bit, and it's just, I don't know what to say in a therapy session. So I don't know. And then, so I just said, give me a pill, and then that's what I just wanted to take something to make it go away. It wasn't happening. Uh, but because I was diagnosed with a conversion disorder, I did get a medical discharge. And, a little over a year after it happened, I was medically retired, from the Navy. And it's like my whole world was upside down. Yeah. I was planning on doing 30 years then, but it came down to the same self-sacrifice of that attitude, because there was, somebody asked me, somebody on my chain of command about where I was at, asked me, they didn't understand why more people didn't fight. Because when you get the medical discharge is a recommendation to Bupers. Bupers makes the decision, right? And I told him it's the position I was in. I couldn't. It was a mental position. I needed to be mentally fit, not for myself, because I held the careers of sailors in my hands and what I did on a daily basis. And it wasn't fair to those sailors to have somebody that's mentally incompetent in charge of them. At the same time, it's not fair to that chief that wants to be a W-2. I'm holding a billet for it that I can't do. So, as much as, I would like to be like men of water and go in there stuttering and say, I can write an eval, or some shit like that. But it's not fair. It wasn't fair to the Navy. It wasn't the best thing for the Navy for me to stay in. So no, I didn't want to get out. I still all the time, want to be doing that because I did it for 22 years. And it hurt because I wasn't able to leave on my terms. But it was the best thing for the Navy, it was the best thing for the sailors. So a couple things about as far as mental health. As a chief, you start dealing with and you see more, things that are going on with your sailors. And, there's other people, you see that they don't have, you can't see the mentality. You can't see a mental illness in somebody. Somebody breaks their arm, you see them in a cast. Somebody twists their ankle, you're on crutches. You can visibly see that they're light and limited duty. And so, in your mind, you don't expect much from them. You can't do that with mental health. And because I had been receiving mental health for so long, I had a greater appreciation for that. But somebody that didn't understand it, if you can't see it, the first thing that you assume is that they're faking it because they don't want to do their work. I heard people say suicide was like a natural selection. And, I was like, okay, it's more to that. But at the same time, I'm trying to not get that stigma on me as well. I stopped telling people that I was going to see mental health. I wasn't hiding it, but I wasn't advertising it at the same time. Just because I knew that people couldn't understand, and I know I wasn't alone. I saw, when, I was at one of my appointments one day and I saw a fellow khaki come out of those appointments. Like he was just, surprised to see me as I was him, because, you don't want to carry that burden of somebody else, thinking that you're doing something stupid because they don't know what mental health is. So I can't say though that from the time that I, enlisted in 1996 to the time I retired in 2018, there has been a vast improvement as far as the recognition of mental health in sailors and trying to get, the help that they need. I know up here in this community, because we're so remote, it's hard to get all of the care that's needed for everybody here. And it's hard for people to recognize when somebody needs care. So I know it's not perfect. I can tell you, I haven't seen a significant difference in civilian care as far as between when I had a civilian in Brunswick and I've been with civilian care since I retired. It actually, with the civilian care, I ended up making a decision that I think more or less made me worse. Is I went through and volunteered for ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, and so pretty much 2019, I don't remember, because every like 3 to 4 weeks I was going down by Seattle, and being electrocuted into a convulsion. So, and on the flip side, on the end of that, I didn't really come out any better. If anything, it's still, symptoms are still the same. Get anxious, start stuttering and start shaking, stuff like that. So it's just the whole mental health. I think that the best thing that we could do is just, one, fight stigmas. Two, don't advertise it as a way to get out of work, so that people will try to fake it in order to do that. Do you know what I mean? Uh, because the people that are faking it, make it harder for the people to go and get help, because they'll suck it up because they don't want to carry that label of just their chain of command not believe them that something is really wrong with them. It's hard. After my episode, I did get hospitalized for suicidal ideations. Yeah, I couldn't handle the way life was going, not just with the Navy, but with home life too. And I did go stay a couple weeks down in Madigan, and I was able, learn some things. The thing that took away the most is, being hospitalized with sailors that actually did try to kill themselves unsuccessfully. People that tried to hang themselves, people that tried to OD, people that came in unconscious because of their suicide attempt, and then able to gain consciousness back. And now I can still see them on Facebook, that their lives are totally changed now. The hardest thing to combat is the stigma, and that's got to be a top-down philosophy. The chain of command has to recognize mental health as an illness, and you're not going to be able to tell who's faking and who's not. It's not up to our chain of command to do that. But if somebody's going, if they see something, if they say something, they, let them go get help. That's the only thing that you can do, because people don't know. They just, and not everybody that's had mental health treatment even knows. It's just, I don't know. If I hadn't had, that warrant officer come up and tell me that day that I needed help, I don't know where I'd be right now. So it's a top-down philosophy, and you got to look at mental health as it is a broken arm or a broken leg. Even though you can't see it, there's something wrong, and it can be fixed. So
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
I kind of jumped around like a mad rabbit,
No, that's
but
okay. That's okay. There was a lot in your story that's incredibly relatable, and I wanted to touch on a few things. The first, the two sailors that you lost to suicide, because I can relate to the feelings of losing a coworker to suicide. It's one of the main reasons why I have the platform that I have today. I don't think enough people are talking about how that affects the command, how that affects the people that have to just pick up and carry on, because there's still a mission to do, there's still work to be done. And yes, I know there are usually counselors that are brought in when there's a suicide in a command, and They might give a day off or half a day off, but that stuff affects people to the core sometimes. I mean, you sometimes lose sailors. I mean, myself as a perfect example, I went limited duty because I was affected so greatly by the coworker that I had lost at my command. So I don't think that's talked about enough, but also the other part that you said where you had to physically go and identify the body and you had to really just be fully immersed in this experience to a different level than other people might have been. And when we think about the people that have direct involvements in suicide, so the MAs that have to go to someone's house or a barracks room when a sailor takes their life, the chain of command that has to go take care of all the other aspects like identifying the body or removing items from the workplace or planning a memorial service. That person that has to go knock on the family's door or make that phone call to say, hey, your child's not coming home because they took their life. I mean, there are people that are so deeply affected by suicides, and it's not just that, oh, someone took their life and they're gone, and yeah, there's just the pain of losing someone. It's so much deeper than that. So now I appreciate that you brought that up because I think there are those things that people don't really think about. I think that suicides have become very I don't know the word to use to describe this, but I think people have become very oblivious and nonchalant towards the subject. We read stories in the news about 3 sailors took their life on an aircraft carrier, and people are like, oh my God, that's horrific. And then a week later, where we're going on with our lives, because I think people truly think that there's nothing they can do. But when you talk about the culture, the stigma, I mean, that is such a huge part of it, because if people could feel comfortable talking about their mental health in the workplace or just feel comfortable going and getting help, I think that would be a huge part of it. That leads me to the next part that you talked about, which is, psychiatrists and the different modalities of therapy that I don't think the military is fully taking advantage of. So I had a psychiatrist too at Woodby Island, and it was very similar. I would go in, he would give me my medication. He would just kind of ask me, like, how are you doing today? There were certain aspects of my life that he wouldn't remember that I felt like he should. Like one of them being, my husband has never served in the military, but he'd always be like, oh, your husband's deployed, right? I'm like, no, no, no. I've told you 3 times now, my husband is not in the military. He's a civilian. So I told him that my husband's not deployed, he's a civilian. And I know it's a little thing, but I wanted the person that was taking care of my mental health to remember certain things about me. I didn't want to feel like I was just a number or a statistic. And I didn't want to feel like I was just another time slot checking the box. And I really felt like that. And so, but then, when we talk about these different modalities, a lot of the military and civilian therapists are still just using talk therapy, which I can relate to, where I didn't really know. Like, I wanted my therapist to help me figure out what was wrong with me, right? Like, I can't just sit down to a therapist and be like, okay, well, I want to work on this, and this. Like, I don't know what direction to go. And so talk
Right.
therapy is very challenging. It's helpful in the way that, like, yeah, I can vent to someone, but I could vent to a friend. I could vent to a family member, right? Like, I feel like I don't need to pay someone to vent. And I think that's where talk therapy doesn't work for a lot of people, because unless that therapist is digging in the right spots and they are doing something different, then it is just sitting down and talking like you're talking to a friend and maybe getting a little bit of advice back from a professional. But yeah, I'm curious to learn more about the ECT that you talked about, because
Hmm.
I've heard of different like electrode therapies that they say are kind of similar to electroshock, but you said to the point of convulsing. I've never
Yeah.
heard of this. I'm curious to hear more.
So what it is, it's actually done in an operating room. You have an IV, and they put a tourniquet on your ankle to stop the blood flow to your foot. And then they give you a general anesthetic. So the rest of your body is numb, and I'm passed out. But because they stopped the blood flow to my ankle, they could still see it convulse whenever they put the things to your temple and send electric shock to your brain and send you into an actual convulsion.
Wow. So they're still doing types of electroshock therapy. That's wild. Was this through like the VA? Was this, I mean,
No, it's
who was this
civilian.
through? Civilian. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I would be curious to read more about the research on that because and then you think of things like this and you think of like the 80s, right? Or where they were doing the lobotomies and the electroshock therapies.
Yeah.
Like and it's wild because we're in a day and age where medicine has advanced, but it hasn't at the same time. And it's really unfortunate when we are in these mental states where we're putting our trust in doctors and we're hoping that they are really thinking in our best interest and trying everything, and we're feeling like we're trying everything, and then um they're still out there doing stuff like electroshock to the point of convulsing. It to me it doesn't sound like a very
It's
safe thing. But
I mean, there's a science behind it. I can't remember everything about it. But it helps some people, and you have to have, not everybody with depression that's being treated for depression, will qualify for the treatment. There's, certain parameters.
right.
It just, for some reason, it wasn't really working out for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's just it's interesting. And I think what's interesting the most to me about it is that when I started digging a little bit deeper into all the different modalities of just therapy out there, they're not being talked about and they're not being utilized to the fullest, because there are modalities of therapy that will dig a little bit deeper without being like a talk therapy. Like I've had
Mhm.
guests on the show that utilize NLP, neuro linguistic programming. And I know people that have tried, the EMDR in their therapy sessions, but then a lot of therapists will use these in a combination with other modalities. And I just think that the military, especially, is not outreaching to the extent that they should to help every single person, knowing that talk therapy is not going to work for every single person. But at the same point, no one should have to be in a position where they feel like, just give me a pill, I just want to make it through every single day. But I think the military has become okay with that because they want people to be in a place where they just make it through every single day. And the same on the veteran side. I think the VA is doing more to advance their studies and their research on things than the active duty side is doing. But I still think there's a very long way to go. And so when we talk about the stigma and the culture, going back to that again, that's where we can do our part to start spreading the word and making it more of a comfortable. I don't think it'll ever be fully comfortable to talk about our mental health. Just like, it wouldn't necessarily be fully comfortable for me to talk about an injury if there's like a weird story behind it, right? Like I don't think comfortable is the right word, but I think more normalized to get to the point where people can say like, hey, you know what, I'm just having a bad mental health day today, and that be okay, because I think we're still at a point where it's not okay for some
Yeah.
people to have these conversations.
Yeah. The education isn't out there. Um, as far as, you know, what mental health is, what depression is and what anxiety is. And so if people don't know, if, like I said, if you can't see it, then they can't feel like it's real. And if they don't feel like it's real, then you know it's it comes back to where you just think that they're malingering because they don't want to work. So it's a hard fight, on both sides. Just because you can't, it's not visible. I have seen it evolved. I could tell from what it was like when I first came in. You know, uh, so I think there is hope. I mean, if you look at the same way with sexual orientation, the way it was in the '90s, the way it is now, a lot of things are more acceptable now than they were. So it is possible, and it's going to take people talking about it and recognizing it and getting out of that farm, getting out of the frame of mind that somebody is really angry. You don't know, you can't know. if they're malingering, it's on them. All right. Yeah. If your whole command is, in line getting a penicillin shot and talking to a therapist, then that's just how it has to be. That's in order to make sure that everybody's getting the treatment that they need. You need to take everybody at their word, whether you think they're faking it or not. It doesn't matter. It's not your opinion. It's not for you to decide. And it's a hard pill for people to swallow. But that's what it's going to take in order, to get over that hump and, start normalizing that mental illness is an illness, and I'm a perfect example of how mental illness can physically hurt you if you just stuff it away. So it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Again, it goes back to the culture, but I think if you use the example of if an entire command is getting therapy, I think that alone is also a good way for these commands to start looking at themselves and their leadership and how people are treating each other in the command. Because if you have 90%, we'll use physical illness, for example. If you have 90% of your sailors getting hurt physically every single month, then there's a problem that needs to be looked at, right? And they look at that as a problem. So same with mentally. If you have 90% of your sailors that have to go to therapy or be medicated because the conditions in that command are not right, then there's something to be looked at, something to be learned. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but these commands can't grow if they don't know what's going on. So I think that's a really great example and something that, people in the military and active duty can learn from this. But I wanted to wrap up the show today, but just asking what advice you would have for anyone else that may be in your position. And I get you've gone through quite a bit. So your position might be, everything that you've gone through encompassed. Maybe there's someone that can relate to an aspect of your story, but I'd love to hear the advice that you have. But then I'd also love to hear about what you are doing these days and what you're up to now that you're out of the military. So if you could start with that, just tell us what you're up to these days, and then we'll wrap it up with any advice that you have for anyone that might be in your position or in any position that you were in previously. And yeah, we'll end with that.
So these days, I'm not really doing much. I kind of I fight with apathy, which I didn't even know what apathy was, before. But it's really hard to motivate myself to do almost anything. We still have 5 kids at home. There's always stuff to do at our house. We've got a new definition of forever home is a home that's going to take forever to finish. So the house is finished, but it's just we have animals and barn and trees, and there's always something to do, and just finding the motivation to do it that's where I struggle with now. But I'm getting there. Still seeing a psychiatrist, still taking meds, trying to do what I can when I can, but some days are good, some days are not, but every day is still a day, and I'm waking up and I'm going to sleep. So it's not bad. I try to stay out of politics because, man, that stuff's crazy, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Awesome. And then what advice would you have for anyone that maybe has been in your shoes or is currently going through what you went through?
So as a mental health patient, my advice is to ignore anybody's that you think is looking down on you or that has a potential to ignore that shit, because they're not going to be there. They're not going to hold your hand, if you're there or if you're not. It's your health, and what's going on in your mind is just as just as hard on you as whatever's going on in your heart, whatever's going on with anything else in your body. There's something medically wrong with you. You need to get checked out. And if it turns out that it's not, or it's easily treatable, or and you go back and you're fine, then that's fine too. But don't leave it up to yourself or your shipmates to diagnose you. Don't leave it up to your chief or your LPO to diagnose you. That's not what they're there for. As a leader in the Navy, one, try to recognize somebody if you see their mood changing. And if you can't, if they're hiding it that well, but they come and tell you that they need to talk to somebody, then you let them go without stigma. And if the other sailors start to talk shit about them, then you stop that right there, because peer pressure can work the other way too. The stigma has to be broken, or people will continue to suffer in silence. People will continue to take their life for no reason. So it's changing, but there's to go, and recognize that even with a mission first attitude, the mission cannot be completed without the sailor. The sailor is the greatest asset in the Navy. And if nobody's taking care of them, then the sailor's not taking care of everything else. No amount of airplanes or ships are worth a damn if you don't have a sailor to work on them, fly them, and drive them. And mental health is a medical problem. It needs to be recognized as such, and you need to be able to see that your sailors are taken care of.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.